Imagine yourself wandering through the narrow streets of a medieval town. The night has settled in, and the world feels smaller beneath the heavy clouds and dim light of a crescent moon. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick from an earlier rain. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint tang of animals that share the streets with people. Dogs bark distantly. A cart creaks as it is pulled home, and somewhere far away, a church bell strikes the hour. Ahead of you, warm light spills out from a low wooden building. Its roof is thatched, its walls timbered and patched with plaster. A sign hangs above the door. A simple picture painted in bright colors that even a weary traveler can recognize without words. Perhaps it shows a bunch of grapes or a foaming mug or a boar's head. This is the tavern, a place where the townsfolk gather after long days of toil and where drink is poured generously into heavy mugs. As you draw closer, you hear the muffled hum of voices within. Laughter rises and falls like waves on a shore. Someone begins a song, off-key but earnest, and others join in, their voices blending with the scrape of a fiddle or the steady beat of a drum. The wooden door shudders as someone pushes it open, staggering out into the cool night, humming to themselves. They steady their step against the doorframe, mumble something half-slurred, and disappear into the shadows of the street. Now you step forward. You push the heavy door open and enter. At once the air changes. The tavern is warm, smoky, and alive with scents that press close around you. The fire crackles in a great hearth along one wall, its flames dancing and casting long shadows across the low ceiling. Candles flicker on rough-hewn tables, dripping wax down their sides. The smell of roasted meat lingers in the air, mingling with the yeasty scent of ale, the sour tang of sweat, and the earthy aroma of wet wool steaming by the fire. The floor is uneven, made of packed dirt in some corners and creaking planks in others. Boots clatter against it, and sometimes a spilled drink leaves a sticky patch where straw has been scattered to soak it up. Benches scrape as people shift, clinking mugs together or slamming them down in rhythm with their laughter. You pause just inside, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The room is crowded but not unwelcoming. Men and women huddle in groups, shoulders brushing as they share a bench. Merchants in wool cloaks lean over their cups, bargaining and whispering about deals. A soldier with a dented helm at his side nurses a mug of ale, his laughter loud and brash. In the corner, peasants still in their work clothes sit together, their hands rough from labor, their eyes bright with the joy of an evening's rest. A pilgrim with a wooden staff leans against the wall, warming himself by the fire, while a pair of travelers quietly split a loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese. The tavern keeper moves steadily among them, a heavy-set man with a stained apron and strong arms. His face is flushed from the fire's heat, and his voice carries above the noise as he calls for patience, for quiet, or for coin. At times his wife appears with a platter of steaming stew, her hands deftly weaving between the benches, balancing bowls without spilling a drop. In the center of the room, a group begins a song. One man stands on the bench, raising his mug as he bellows the first verse. The others join in, their voices rough but full of spirit. The words are old, half-remembered, about kings and knights, or perhaps about ale itself. The details matter less than the rhythm. Soon the crowd claps along, mugs tapping against the table in time. Somewhere behind you the door opens again, letting in a rush of cold night air. A farmer stumbles in, shaking droplets of rain from his cloak, his cheeks ruddy from both weather and ale. He makes his way to the bar, where the tavern keeper already knows what he'll ask for. Coins clink against wood, a mug is filled from a barrel, and the farmer turns to find his friends. Everywhere you look there is motion, life, and warmth. The tavern is not a place of refinement. It is not polished or orderly, but it is a place where the weight of the day falls away. The drink helps, yes, but so does the company, the laughter, the fire, and the feeling of being part of something shared. You find a spot at the edge of a bench, squeezing in among strangers who greet you with nods and smiles. A mug is passed your way. It is wooden, heavy in your hand, and the ale within it is cloudy but rich with a smell that is earthy and comforting. You raise it to your lips and taste the brew. Slightly bitter, faintly sweet, alive with the strength of the grain. Around you, stories are told. A man recalls the fair in the next town over, boasting of goods he nearly bought but didn't. Another tells a tale of soldiers marching, of banners seen on the horizon. A woman laughs at the thought of her neighbor's misfortune when his pig escaped into the marketplace. The details blur, but the sound of it all is steady, like waves rolling against the shore of your mind. The longer you sit, the more the noise becomes a background hum. Laughter blends with music. The fire pops and the candlelight flickers across the beams of the ceiling. Somewhere dice clatter against wood. Somewhere else a man dozes, head heavy in his arms. The warmth seeps into your skin, into your bones, into your thoughts. This is the heart of the tavern. Not the ale alone, nor the food, nor even the music. It is the gathering. The sense of stepping out of the cold world into a place where voices, bodies, and lives mingle together. It is a place of stories, of fleeting joys, of songs sung too loudly and mugs raised too high. And so, as you sit quietly with your drink, you feel yourself drifting into the rhythm of the room. The flicker of fire, the murmur of voices, the soft glow of candlelight, all of it draws you in gently, steadily, until the world outside is forgotten. Here, in the medieval tavern, the night has only just begun. If you sit long enough in the tavern, you begin to notice the variety of faces gathered around the tables. Some are familiar to one another, laughing and leaning close in conversation. Others are strangers, travelers who have stopped for food and drink on their way to somewhere else. A tavern was never just one thing, it was many things at once. A resting place, a gathering hall, a news station, a refuge. And the people who came through its doors reflected all the layers of medieval life. At first, you notice the peasants. Their hands are roughened from work in the fields, their clothes patched and worn, but their spirits seem light in the glow of the fire. For them, the tavern is not a luxury. It is a taste of freedom from the endless routine of labor. They drink their ale slowly, savoring each mouthful. Sometimes they share one mug among several of them, not out of poverty alone but out of habit, as if the sharing itself is part of the pleasure. They talk of harvests, of weather, of livestock, and of small troubles that loom large in daily life. To be in the tavern is to step briefly into a world where toil fades into the background. Next, your eyes are drawn to the merchants. They are easy to spot, with their heavier cloaks and finer shoes. Their voices carry as they haggle, even here at the tables over steaming bowls of stew. A merchant might raise a mug of wine, imported and more expensive than the ale of the peasants. They drink not only to relax, but also to seal bargains, to test trust, and to measure the worth of new acquaintances. Sometimes a merchant's pouch jingles loudly as he shifts in his seat. Other times he keeps a hand pressed over it, wary of nimble fingers and crowded corners. For merchants, the tavern is both office and playground, half business, half relief. Across the room you may see a soldier or two. Their armor has been set aside, piled against the wall or resting beneath the bench, though a sword might still hang from the belt. Their laughter is often loudest, their tempers quick to rise, and their mugs emptied faster than most. Soldiers in taverns seek camaraderie, as well as a temporary forgetting of battles faced and battles yet to come. Some boast of victories, real or imagined. Others fall into silence, staring into the fire as though it holds memories too sharp to speak aloud. When the songs begin, they are often the first to join in, their voices carrying notes of triumph and sorrow in equal measure. Among the crowd, travelers make their way quietly. Pilgrims with worn sandals and wooden staffs sit near the fire, warming their bones after miles of walking. Some wear badges or tokens from holy shrines they have visited, their cloaks dusted with the road. They sip weak ale slowly, sometimes murmuring prayers, sometimes listening more than speaking. Beside them, other travelers arrive with carts or on horseback, stopping in the tavern for a night before the road calls again. Their stories are fresh, carrying news from distant towns and villages. For locals, such visitors are a window to the wider world. For the travelers themselves, the tavern is a brief refuge, a place to rest, to listen, to blend in. And then, there are those who come less visibly, slipping in with watchful eyes. Thieves, gamblers, men who thrive on secrets whispered too loudly after too many mugs of ale. The tavern offers them opportunity, a gathering of distracted people and loose tongues. Dice clatter on wooden tables, coins exchanged, tempers flaring over accusations of cheating. Some disappear into the crowd easily, unnoticed, blending into the haze of smoke and laughter. They are part of the tavern as much as the fire in the hearth, never central but always there, lurking in the edges of the night. Clergy, too, were not strangers to taverns. Though sermons thundered against drunkenness, though priests warned of the sins of excess, it was not uncommon to see a man of the cloth sharing a mug with townsfolk. Some were there to keep watch, to remind people of virtue, but others were drawn in by the same pull that brought everyone else: the warmth, the drink, the company. A friar might sit among peasants telling tales, laughing heartily, and raising his cup as though heaven itself would forgive the indulgence. Not every holy man kept himself apart, and there were women, wives, widows, daughters, and alewives. Some ran the tavern, serving food and drink with practiced skill. Others came as patrons, sitting beside their husbands or among other women, their laughter just as quick, their stories just as sharp. In larger towns, women might gather in taverns to trade gossip, to learn news, to weave themselves into the shared fabric of community. Though not always welcome in every space, they were present, their voices adding another note to the tavern's hum. Children, too, sometimes slipped inside. Not to drink, though weak ale was common even for the young, but to watch, to fetch, to carry messages. They darted between benches, collecting empty mugs or helping serve food, their eyes wide, their ears quick to pick up the rhythm of songs and stories. They absorbed the world of the tavern before they were fully part of it. What strikes you, as you look around, is how the tavern is one of the rare places where all these people meet. In the fields, in the marketplace, in the court, lives were separated by rank and duty, but in the tavern the lines blurred. A merchant might sit near a farmer, a soldier might share a table with a pilgrim, a priest might laugh with a widow. The ale helped dissolve distance, and the fire gathered all equally in its warmth. In this mingling, news was carried. Tales of kings and wars, rumors of harvests, whispers of plague, songs of saints. A man could walk into a tavern in one village and leave knowing stories that traveled across the land. And so the tavern was not only a place of drinking, it was a place of connection, of information, of voices weaving together into something larger than any one person. You sit quietly, watching, listening. You hear the accents of different regions. You see clothes from different classes. You feel the shifting moods: joy, weariness, anger, relief. The tavern is not one thing. It is many things at once. And every person here, whether farmer or priest, soldier or thief, adds another thread to the tapestry of the night. As you finish your drink, the thought lingers. Here, in the dim firelight of a medieval tavern, you could glimpse the whole of society in miniature. Not polished, not tidy, but alive, noisy, messy, and very, very human. If the tavern is the stage, then the drinks themselves are the true actors. Without them, the songs would be quieter, the laughter dimmer, the stories less bold. To understand what it was like to get drunk in a medieval tavern, one must first understand what filled the mugs, the bowls, and the heavy jugs passed from hand to hand. The bowls and the heavy jugs passed from hand to hand. The most common drink, the one most often poured into those wooden cups, was ale. But medieval ale was not quite the same as what one might imagine today. It was often cloudy, sometimes with bits of grain floating within it, and it carried the earthy smell of malted barley and herbs. It could be weak, brewed for daily use and safe to drink in place of water, or it could be strong, brewed with more grain and fermented longer, creating something far more potent. The weak ale was for children, for laborers, for anyone who needed hydration during the day. The strong ale, however, was what filled the tavern with its buzz of merriment. Water in medieval towns was not always trusted. Wells could be foul, streams polluted, and stagnant pools dangerous. Brewing ale made the liquid safer. The boiling killed harmful elements and the fermentation preserved it. So ale became the default. To drink ale was to live. To drink stronger ale in a tavern was to step into another world, one where burdens softened, where tongues loosened, where the night stretched out long. There was also mead, though less common than ale. Mead was the drink of honey, water, and yeast, sometimes flavored with herbs or spices. It was sweet, golden, and often associated with celebrations or with wealth. In some places, mead was seen as more refined, reserved for feasts or for those who could afford the honey needed to make it. When it appeared in a tavern, it was treated almost as a luxury, a bright contrast to the darker, heavier ale. Cider, too, found its way into mugs, especially in regions rich with apple orchards. It was sharp, tart, and refreshing, a drink of the countryside. Farmers might bring barrels of it to town, and tavern keepers might serve it when ale supplies ran low. Like ale, cider could be weak or strong, its potency shifting depending on how long it was left to ferment. Wine had its place as well, though it depended on geography and trade. In southern lands where vineyards spread across hillsides, wine was plentiful. In northern regions, it was more of an import, carried in barrels from distant places. Wine was considered finer, more expensive, often linked with the church or with the wealthier classes. Still, taverns served it when they could, and those who could afford it drank it with relish. Sometimes, to stretch supplies, tavern keepers mixed it with water or spices, creating mulled wine or diluted cups that still carried the taste, if not the full strength, of the original. Then there were the more curious brews. In some places, ale was flavored with groot, a mix of herbs such as yarrow, bog myrtle, or rosemary. These gave the drink a bitter, sometimes medicinal flavor. Later, hops became common, but in the early medieval centuries, ale was far more herbal, its bitterness drawn from the plants of the local land. Each tavern's ale might taste different, depending on what grew nearby and what the brewer chose to add. To drink in one tavern was not the same as drinking in another. The flavor carried the landscape within it. Some brews were nearly forgotten outside the tavern walls. A strong, thick drink might be called double ale, made with extra grain, heavy and intoxicating. In other corners of Europe, people experimented with fermented milk or spiced concoctions that blurred the line between medicine and merriment. These were rarer, yet they remind us that medieval drinking was never uniform. It was local, experimental, shaped by resources and traditions. In the tavern, the drinks were more than just liquid. They carried meaning. To raise a mug of strong ale was to show strength, to offer hospitality, to welcome friendship. To share a jug of wine was to seal trust, to create a bond. To sip mead was to celebrate, to honor the sweetness of life in a world often bitter. The drinks were part of ritual, part of the rhythm of social life. The vessels themselves told stories too. Mugs were carved from wood, sometimes reinforced with metal bands. Others were made of horn, polished smooth, gleaming in the firelight. Wealthier taverns might offer pewter cups, their dull shine catching the candle's glow. Clay jugs and pitchers were common, their handles worn smooth from countless pours. To drink from these vessels was to hold history in your hands, for each cup carried the mark of many nights before. And yet, not all tavern drinks were pure. Some tavern keepers were known to water down their ale, to stretch their barrels further and earn more coin. Others mixed in less savory ingredients, adding bitterness to hide the weakness of the brew. The complaints of such practices traveled in whispers and jokes, yet people returned nonetheless because the tavern was not about perfection. It was about gathering, and even weak ale could loosen the tongue and warm the belly. Imagine the taste of it now. A sip of strong ale, thick, slightly sour, leaving a warmth that spreads from your chest outward. A swallow of mead, honey sweet, coating the tongue with golden smoothness. A gulp of cider, crisp and sharp, refreshing after the heaviness of the day. Each drink carries its own character, its own music, blending into the chorus of voices that rise in the tavern. As you sit, you notice how different groups favor different drinks. The peasants with their ale, the merchants leaning toward wine, the occasional soldier gulping whatever is strongest. The pilgrim, humble, takes what is cheapest. The thief, perhaps, drinks little, preferring sharp wits over dulled senses. Yet all are joined in the act of drinking. The differences in class, in taste, in purse fade into the shared ritual of raising a mug, of swallowing warmth, of sighing with satisfaction as the liquid takes hold. For the medieval tavern, drink was both necessity and escape. It quenched thirst in a world where water was risky. It filled the stomach when food was scarce. It carried energy to weary bodies. but it also softened the edges of life, turning burdens into laughter, sorrows into song, solitude into fellowship. The drinks themselves were never merely background. They were the pulse, the heartbeat, the steady rhythm that guided the night. Each mug poured was another moment of connection, another chance to forget, another thread woven into the fabric of tavern life. And so, as the candles burn low and the fire crackles on, the mugs are lifted again and again. Ale, wine, mead, cider, all flow freely, binding together the voices, the songs, the sighs of a medieval tavern deep in the heart of the night. In the dim warmth of the tavern, mugs are never empty for long, but drink was rarely the only thing on the tables. Alongside the ale and wine came food, sometimes simple, sometimes hearty, sometimes little more than scraps. The meals of the medieval tavern were not refined feasts, yet they carried a comfort of their own. To eat here was to share, to linger, and to fill the belly as much as the spirit. Picture the scene. On a long wooden table sits a thick loaf of bread, its crust dark, its center dense and heavy. A knife is passed down the bench, slicing uneven portions, sometimes tearing instead of cutting. Bread was the foundation, the base upon which all else was built. It soaked up broth, steadied the drink, and filled the spaces of hunger. In many taverns, bread was served in great quantities, for it was cheap and necessary. Beside the bread, there might be a pot of stew simmering over the hearth. The smell drifts through the smoky air, onions, carrots, and turnips, softened by the fire. Bits of meat float within, perhaps beef or mutton, perhaps something less certain depending on what the tavern keeper could acquire. Stew was practical. It could be stretched to feed many, and each day's pot carried flavors of what was available. For those with coin, a bowl of steaming stew was more than nourishment. It was warmth, comfort, and the feeling of being cared for after long hours of labor or travel. Cheese often made an appearance, cut into thick wedges, its sharpness a welcome contrast to the heaviness of bread and broth. Some cheeses were fresh and soft, others aged and firm. In farming regions, cheese was plentiful, carried in by peasants who bartered wheels of it for mugs of ale. It was a food that lasted, and in the tavern, it was eaten slowly, a bite at a time, shared across the table. Meat, though prized, was less common for ordinary folk. Yet in taverns, especially on market days or festivals, roasted meats filled the air with their rich, smoky scent. A spit might turn above the fire, fat dripping and hissing as it struck the flames. Pork was common, its savory aroma drawing eager glances. Sausages, too, were served, their spices mingling with the taste of ale. On special occasions, a tavern might offer fowl, chickens, ducks, or even geese carved into portions and served alongside hearty bread. To eat meat in a tavern was to taste celebration, a reminder that not every day was toil and hunger. For those of higher means, fish sometimes appeared. In river towns or near the sea, taverns served salted herring, dried cod, or fresh trout. These were often boiled or stewed, accompanied by herbs if the tavern keeper could afford them. Fish was also tied to church days when meat was forbidden, and so taverns adjusted their menus accordingly. Even in such restrictions, there was food to be found, and the tavern remained a place of sustenance. Pies made their way into taverns too, thick-crusted, hearty, filled with whatever could be found. Some were savory, packed with meat and vegetables. Others were sweet, with apples or berries when the season allowed. Pies were practical, easy to store, easy to slice and serve. They could be shared among several, or eaten whole by one with a deep purse and a deeper hunger. In quieter corners, plates of pickled vegetables sat on tables, cabbage, onions, cucumbers, preserved to last through winter. Their sharp, tangy taste cut through the heaviness of ale, refreshing the palate. Eggs, too, appeared, boiled hard and served with bread, simple but filling. In some taverns, nuts or dried fruits could be bought, small luxuries that brought variety to the table. The food was never only about taste. It was about the rhythm of the evening. Bread steadied the hand that held the mug. Stew softened the effects of strong ale. Cheese and meat stretched the night longer, allowed the drink to settle, kept the laughter going. Food and drink were woven together, each supporting the other in the flow of tavern life. Think of the sounds. The crack of crust as bread is broken, the clatter of spoons in bowls, the scrape of knives against wooden plates. These mingle with laughter, with song, with the clinking of mugs. The tavern is never silent, and even the act of eating adds to its music. And yet the food told stories of class as clearly as the drinks did. A peasant might eat bread and broth, nothing more. A merchant might call for roast meat, his coin buying abundance. A soldier might split a pie with his comrades, devouring it quickly between mugs of ale. A pilgrim, weary from the road, might be given a bowl of stew and bread, offered with kindness as much as with payment. Each plate reflected what one could afford, but also what one shared. For in the tavern, food was rarely eaten alone. The tavern keeper played a crucial role here too. He was not only a seller of drink, but also a provider of food, deciding what could be served from day to day. His kitchen was not lavish, but it was resourceful, stretching ingredients, creating meals that could satisfy many with little. Sometimes he charged by the portion, sometimes by the pot. Sometimes food was included with drink, a way to keep customers seated longer, ordering more ale. Even so, tavern food was not always praised. Jests about tough meat, sour broth, or stale bread were common. Some complained of stew that seemed to be reheated endlessly, with each day's pot only growing thicker. Others laughed about pies whose fillings were a mystery better left unsolved. Yet people returned because the tavern was not about perfect meals. It was about being fed, about sharing, about finding warmth in a world that was often cold and harsh. Picture it now. You sit at the bench, a mug of ale beside you, and before you a bowl of stew. Steam rises, carrying the smell of herbs and onions. You dip your spoon, bring the broth to your lips. Feel the warmth spread through you. A slice of bread soaks in the broth, softening, carrying the flavor of meat and spice. A wedge of cheese follows, sharp and tangy. Around you, others eat too, each mouthful grounding them, each shared platter pulling them closer together. This is the food of the tavern. Simple, hearty, uneven, sometimes rough, but always human. It is the food that makes the night last longer, that steadies the drink, that reminds the weary traveler that they are not alone. And so the tavern is not only a place of drink, it is a place of bread broken, stew shared, pies sliced, and laughter carried on the steam of warm meals. To eat here is to join in a tradition of fellowship, one bowl and one loaf at a time. Drinking in a medieval tavern was never only about the liquid itself. It was about the ritual, the way mugs were lifted, the way voices rose in unison, the way gestures of hospitality and challenge mingled in each round. To drink was to participate in a shared performance, one that stretched back through generations and bound people together in the moment. Picture the bench where you sit. A jug of ale is brought forth heavy in the tavern keeper's hand. He sets it down at the center of the table, and without hesitation, someone grabs it, fills the first mug, and then passes it on. One by one, the mugs are filled, until each person holds their share. Only then does the true rhythm begin. The first sip is rarely silent. Often there is a toast, words lifted above the noise. A simple phrase, to friends, or to good fortune. Sometimes it is more playful, to the one who pays next. Laughter follows. Mugs are raised high and then all drink together. The act of drinking in unison turns the ale into something more than ale. It becomes a binding thread, a ritual of belonging. Not all drinks are swallowed whole. Some are savored slowly, sipped with quiet conversation. Yet others are taken in great gulps, emptied at once in shows of strength or bravado. To drain a mug in one long pull was a feat admired, though it often left the drinker gasping, the last drop spilling down their chin. Cheers and claps followed such displays, and the mug was quickly filled again, ready for the next attempt. Sometimes the drinking took the form of games. Dice were thrown, wagers made, and the loser was required to drain their mug. In other games, the mug was passed from person to person, each taking a drink before sending it along. To spill was shameful, to hesitate was mocked, and to refuse was unthinkable. The tavern was a place where pride and play mingled, where each drink carried both laughter and risk. Songs were another ritual. Some were short and rowdy, sung between sips, the words half lost in the noise. Others were longer, ballads of knights and battles, of saints and miracles, of love both true and foolish. Often the song began with one bold voice, then grew as others joined, the chorus swelling until it filled the whole room. Mugs tapped against the table in rhythm, feet stomped, and the tavern became not just a hall of drinking, but a hall of music, alive with sound. The gestures mattered too. To offer your mug to another was a sign of trust, for drinks were shared, vessels passed hand to hand. To pour for someone else was an act of respect, acknowledging their place at the table. Even the clinking of mugs carried meaning, an echo of unity, a declaration that in this moment no one drank alone. There were also playful challenges. One man might boast he could outdrink another, and soon the table watched as they went mug for mug, each round cheered on by the crowd. These contests were rarely about winning, they were about the spectacle, the laughter, the camaraderie built in the shared folly of excess. In some regions, rituals stretched beyond the tavern walls. Ale stakes, wooden poles hung with garlands or signs, marked the presence of a tavern. To step inside was to enter not just a place of commerce, but a space of tradition, where customs of drinking were already known. Every town, every village had its variations, yet the essence was the same. To drink was to belong. Even silence had its place. Sometimes a man sat with his mug, saying little, only raising it now and then to his lips. The act itself was enough, the drink a quiet companion. The tavern welcomed both the loud and the quiet, the singers and the thinkers. What mattered was presence, the willingness to join in the rhythm of mugs raised and emptied. And beneath it all, there was always a kind of unspoken agreement. Drinking was not only about pleasure, but about trust. To share a jug was to accept another into your circle. To drink together was to soften boundaries, to let down walls, to open the self in ways that the harsh daylight of the marketplace did not allow. In the tavern, with ale warming the veins, truths slipped out more easily. Confessions were made, alliances forged, promises whispered. Whether or not they endured the morning mattered less than the fact that in that moment they were real. The ritual of drinking also carried warnings. Drink too fast, too recklessly, and the night might end in shame or in violence. The tavern keeper watched closely, ready to step in when games went too far, when toasts turned to insults, when laughter gave way to fists. Yet even this was part of the ritual, the edge of danger that reminded everyone that drink was powerful, that it loosened not only joy, but also anger. Still, more often than not, the rituals ended in laughter. Mugs clinked, songs rang, dice rolled, and the night slipped onward like a river carrying all with it. The ale flowed, the mead glowed, the wine shone dark in the firelight, and the people moved together in the age-old dance of drink. Now imagine yourself again at that bench. A jug is set before you. The man beside you grins, fills your mug, and raises his own. He says, "To the night, and to all who share it." Around the table, others raise their mugs too. Together you drink. The warmth spreads, the laughter grows, and you realize that this, more than anything else, is what the tavern is for. Not only the ale, not only the food, but the ritual itself. The shared act of drinking, the weaving together of voices, of lives, of stories, one sip at a time. And so the night continues. Each round another thread, each toast another knot, binding the people of the tavern together in a fabric that lasts at least until the fire burns low and the last mug is drained. To drink in a medieval tavern was to invite not just warmth and laughter, but also a slow unfolding of sensations. The ale or mead, once swallowed, did not remain a simple drink. It changed the body, the mind, and the mood. As the night went on, people shifted through stages of drunkenness, stages that were familiar to all who gathered at the bench. It began softly, almost gently. The first mug of ale sent a warmth down the throat, a spreading comfort into the belly. Faces flushed with a little color, words flowed more easily, and laughter came sooner. This first stage was the sweet spot of drinking. the point where burdens loosened and worries softened. A man who had worked the fields all day felt his muscles unknot. A merchant who fretted over his accounts forgot them for a while. The ale seemed to wash the edges off the world, leaving everything rounder, softer, more forgiving. With a second or third mug, the warmth deepened. The drinker's voice often rose, confidence swelling along with the ale. Conversations grew more animated. Hands gestured more widely. Songs burst out without hesitation. Compliments were given freely, and jokes landed with louder laughter than they might in the cold light of morning. In this stage, the tavern sparkled. Everyone seemed livelier, merrier, caught up in the shared glow. But ale was a slow trickster. While it loosened tongues and hearts, it also blurred the senses. At first, only a slight sway was felt when standing, a little stumble on the way back from the hearth. Then the missteps became more noticeable. Dice were dropped, mugs tipped, and words began to slur. It was here that the tavern keeper watched most closely, for he knew well the turning point between merry drinking and dangerous excess. Those who drank beyond that turning point entered the next stage. Loudness, boldness, sometimes foolishness. Boasts grew grander. A man claimed he could fight 10, or that his horse could outrun the wind. Stories stretched taller, arguments sparked quicker. Sometimes these arguments were harmless, ending in laughter. Other times they flared into real quarrels, fists pounding tables, or on occasion, each other. For others, the ale had a gentler effect. Instead of loudness, they grew sentimental. They spoke of lost loves, of mothers gone, of dreams never fulfilled. Tears might glisten in firelight, unexpected and raw. To be drunk in a medieval tavern was not always to be merry. It was also to be vulnerable, to show sides of oneself that the sober day never allowed. Companions often comforted these weeping drinkers, clapping shoulders, refilling mugs, offering songs to drown sorrow in fellowship. And then came the stage of confusion. Eyes drooped, words jumbled, mugs slipped from careless fingers. Some rested their heads on the table, surrendering to sleep in the very midst of noise. Others wandered toward the door, swaying, determined to find their way home, but not always succeeding. The tavern floor was no stranger to snoring figures who had decided that the straw underfoot was as good a bed as any. The physical effects were felt strongly in this stage. A heavy body, clumsy hands, an unsteady gaze, all signs that the ale had taken full hold. The stomach sometimes turned against its master, and more than one medieval tavern floor bore the unpleasant proof of too much drink. Yet even this was met with a kind of weary acceptance, for it was known that ale was both friend and foe, comforter and betrayer. To drink past this point was to enter the realm of true drunkenness, where memory itself slipped away. A man might wake with no recollection of how he left the tavern, or how he found himself in the straw of a stable, or why his coin purse was lighter than before. These were the risks of the night, risks known yet often chosen anyway. But alongside these harsher truths was always the humor of it. Medieval culture embraced the fool who drank too much. Jesters, plays, and even sermons poked fun at the drunkard. The man who stumbled into the river, who mistook a lantern for the moon, who sang love songs to a pig thinking it a fair maiden. To be drunk was a failing, but it was also a story, a moment of laughter for others, and sometimes even for oneself the next morning. Not all effects were physical or comic. Drink could change the atmosphere in subtler ways. It encouraged honesty, loosened secrets, brought confessions to the surface. Promises of friendship were sworn over mugs, sometimes kept, sometimes forgotten. Small quarrels were patched up with another round. A shy man might finally speak his mind. A weary one might finally rest. Ale was a mirror and a mask, showing truth and hiding it all at once. The morning, of course, carried its own effects. The hangover, though not called by that name, was well known. Heavy heads, dry mouths, aching bellies. All were reminders of the night before. Remedies varied. Some swore by more ale to smooth the edges, others by broth, others still by prayer. Yet even with the pain, many returned to the tavern soon after, ready to repeat the cycle. For the memory of warmth, laughter, and belonging outweighed the memory of headache. In the end, the effects of getting drunk in a medieval tavern were as varied as the people themselves. Some grew loud, others quiet. Some grew bold, others tender. Some remembered the night forever, others forgot it entirely. But all shared in the same truth. Drink was never just a liquid. It was an experience, a journey from the first warming sip to the final staggering step home. And so night after night, century after century, the ritual continued. The ale flowed, the songs rose, the mugs clinked, and the effects of drink unfolded once more. Predictable, yet endlessly new. Each tavern night was a play performed on the same stage, with the same familiar acts, yet with a cast always changing, always unique. If drink was the spark that lit the medieval tavern, then social life was the fuel that kept the fire burning. To step through the tavern door was not simply to find ale, it was to find company, to sit in the hum of voices, and to feel part of something larger than oneself. For the people of the Middle Ages, taverns were as much gathering halls as they were drinking houses. Villages did not have cafes, theaters, or concert halls. The tavern was all of these at once. It was a place to hear stories, to share news, to form friendships, and sometimes to settle disputes. One of the most common forms of tavern social life was simple conversation. Neighbors met after long days of work and shared what had happened in the fields, the marketplace, or the manor court. A farmer might complain about the weather, a craftsman about the price of wool, a fisherman about the size of his catch. Laughter and groans rose as each tale unfolded. To listen and be heard was as nourishing as the ale itself. Gossip was another powerful presence. Few written records capture the whispers of ordinary people, but in taverns, gossip thrived. Who had married whom? Who was quarreling? Who had been fined by the local lord? Such tidbits flowed with every round of drink. Gossip was entertainment, but it was also information. In a world without printed newspapers, taverns were newsrooms, keeping people informed of the lives around them. Songs filled the tavern air as well. Drinking songs, often simple and repetitive, were sung in unison, their rhythms echoing the clink of mugs. Ballads told longer tales, of knights, maidens, saints, or sinners. Some were light-hearted, others tragic. Singing together bound the crowd into a single body, lifting spirits high above the weight of daily life. Storytelling was another feature. The traveling minstrel or wandering bard often found a welcome seat in the tavern. In exchange for a mug of ale or a few coins, he told tales of distant lands, ancient battles, or mythical beasts. Even without professional storytellers, locals entertained one another with anecdotes, jokes, and memories. A man who had traveled to a nearby town might return with tales of wonders seen there, a festival, a new church, or a strange foreign merchant. Beyond entertainment, taverns also served as places of business. Deals were struck across wooden tables. Farmers agreed on the price of grain. Craftsmen negotiated for tools or materials, and even landlords or bailiffs might meet tenants in the tavern to discuss rent. Some local courts and councils occasionally gathered in taverns as well, using the space for official purposes when no other hall was available. For young people, taverns were also social crossroads. Courtship, subtle or bold, often unfolded in their dim corners. A young man might buy a drink for a young woman, or two might find themselves singing together, their laughter weaving a bond. Parents were not always pleased, but taverns created opportunities for mingling beyond family supervision. In this sense, the tavern acted as a quiet stage where romances began. Taverns also gave space for games. Dice rattled, cards shuffled, and board games like Nine Men's Morris passed the hours. Gambling was officially frowned upon, but it happened all the same. Bets were laid not just on games, but on anything: how long it would take a neighbor to finish his ale, or which rooster would crow first in the morning. Winning meant extra coins for drink. Losing meant enduring the laughter of one's companions. The social life of the tavern also had its deeper layers. Politics often crept in, whispered carefully but firmly. Villagers spoke of taxes, lords, or kings. Merchants discussed trade laws. In times of unrest, taverns became places where discontent quietly gathered strength, where ideas of rebellion or reform spread from voice to voice. Authorities sometimes worried about this and sent spies or church officials to listen in. But no matter the concern, the tavern could not be stripped of its role as a place of talk. Religious life, too, touched the tavern in curious ways. Though priests often condemned drinking houses as dens of sin, They also knew taverns were where their parishioners gathered. Some tavern keepers hosted meetings of church fraternities or guilds. Pilgrims on their journey stopped in for food and ale, telling stories of shrines and miracles. In this way, even spiritual life threaded itself into the tavern's fabric. There was also the quiet comfort of belonging. For the lonely, the widowed, or the traveler far from home, a tavern was a place to hear voices, to sit in the glow of firelight, and to feel less alone. The tavern did not always require conversation. Sometimes simply being among others listening to the hum was enough. And yet not all social life was harmonious. Quarrels sometimes sparked, especially when drink loosened tempers. Arguments over land, debts, or insults could flare into brawls. Tavern keepers learned to keep order, sometimes pouring water on disputes, sometimes calling for help. Yet even these moments reinforced the tavern's role as the heart of village life. Both the joy and the conflict of human community played out within its walls. Ultimately, the tavern was a mirror of medieval society. It reflected daily struggles, hopes, humor, and sorrow. It was where bonds were made, secrets were shared, and voices were lifted in song or argument. The tavern was not merely a place to drink. It was the stage on which ordinary people performed the small dramas of their lives night after night, generation after generation. And so when the door closed and the fire burned low, what remained was not just the memory of ale, but the memory of togetherness. The tavern was not built of wood and stone alone. It was built of voices, laughter, whispers, and songs. It lived as long as people gathered, and it died only when the benches sat empty. But just as often, taverns were places where the law was bent or broken. Smugglers met there to trade goods away from the eyes of tax collectors. Secret meetings between political factions took place in dim corners. Even outlaws might slip into a tavern, hood drawn low, hoping to blend into the crowd. For this reason, some lords and sheriffs treated taverns with suspicion, keeping spies or informants among the regulars. The relationship between tavern keepers and the law was delicate. A wise landlord knew how to balance compliance with survival. Too strict an adherence to rules might drive away customers. Too much freedom could attract punishment. Many landlords found themselves paying fines one week and offering free cups of ale to the local bailiff the next, hoping to smooth relations. Interestingly, taverns were sometimes tied to guilds and brotherhoods. In certain towns, guilds of craftsmen met in taverns, and their gatherings had legal weight. Agreements signed over ale could be binding. Oaths sworn in a tavern carried the same seriousness as those taken in a hall. The tavern, then, was not lawless. It was a place where law was lived out informally, alongside laughter and song. In times of unrest, taverns could also become centers of rebellion. History tells of revolts where plans were whispered over mugs of ale before spilling out into the streets. Authorities knew this and often kept watch, fearing that too much drinking together might lead to dangerous talk. For rulers, the tavern was both a tool and a threat. It kept the people fed and content, but it also gave them space to gather and plot. So the law circled around taverns constantly, shaping their hours, their prices, their quality, and even their reputation. To drink in a tavern was not only to share ale with friends. It was to step into a space deeply woven into the fabric of rules, taxes, and authority. Every mug lifted carried with it the unseen weight of regulations, decrees, and watchful eyes. And yet, despite all these laws, the tavern endured. People needed them. People wanted them. And so, the tavern keeper kept brewing, the customers kept drinking, and the law kept chasing after them, trying to strike a balance between freedom and control. One can picture it. A town bailiff walking in, cloak damp with rain, holding a list of fines to be handed out. The tavern quiets for a moment, then resumes its hum. The landlord pays what must be paid, the bailiff accepts his cup of ale, and life continues. Outside, the streets are dark, but inside, the tavern glows. A space where law and life meet, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, but always together. By the later Middle Ages, the tavern was already centuries old. It had seen countless travelers come and go, countless cups of ale raised and emptied, countless arguments, songs, and stories carried out under its roof. But nothing stays the same forever. Just as the medieval world itself was changing, Its economies growing, its towns expanding, its cultures shifting. So too the tavern began to transform. Slowly, almost quietly, the place people had known for generations began to take new forms, and the word tavern itself would one day give way to other names. The first sign of change came with the growth of trade and travel. In earlier centuries, most journeys were short, and a simple tavern by the roadside or in a village square was enough. But as roads improved and markets drew merchants across greater distances, people began to need more than just a bench and a cup of ale. They needed beds, stables, and food prepared for weary bodies. Thus, the inn began to emerge alongside the tavern. An inn was not entirely different, a place to drink certainly, but it was also a place to sleep, to rest one's horse, to find shelter for the night. This did not mean the tavern disappeared. In many towns, taverns remained the local drinking halls, places for the community rather than travelers. But the presence of inns, often larger and better funded, slowly shifted the focus. By the 15th and 16th centuries, the words inn, tavern, and alehouse were often blurred together. Each still served drink, but each also served slightly different needs. The tavern, in its older form, began to seem less central. Another transformation was driven by the drinks themselves. Wine, once rare and expensive in Northern Europe, became more available as trade expanded. Imported barrels from France or Italy arrived in ports, making taverns that specialized in wine more fashionable. At the same time, ale and beer continued to evolve. In the late Middle Ages, hops became more widely used in brewing, changing the flavor, strength, and keeping qualities of beer. This new hopped beer spread rapidly from the Low Countries into Germany and England. Alehouses sprang up to serve it, distinct from older wine taverns. Each place, in its own way, was a descendant of the medieval tavern, but each carried a new identity. The law also pushed the transformation. As we saw earlier, taverns were heavily regulated. By the 15th century, many towns began issuing stricter licenses, differentiating between taverns, inns, and alehouses. A tavern might be licensed for wine, while an alehouse sold only beer, and an inn provided lodging as well as drink. What had once been one broad institution splintered into categories. The tavern still existed, but its role was more narrowly defined. Cultural attitudes shifted too. For centuries, the tavern had been at the heart of communal life. But with the Renaissance and Reformation, new ideas spread about morality, self-discipline, and the dangers of drink. Protestant reformers in particular were suspicious of taverns, seeing them as places of idleness and temptation. Pamphlets and sermons spoke of the dangers of wasted hours, of men spending their wages on ale instead of bread for their families. This did not stop people from going, but it changed the way taverns were seen. They were less celebrated, more criticized. At the same time, new spaces of sociability appeared. In the 17th century, coffee houses began to spread across Europe. Here, instead of ale and wine, people drank the strange, stimulating black liquid that arrived from Ottoman lands. Coffee houses attracted merchants, scholars, and politicians. They were seen as more refined, more intellectual. For some, the tavern became associated with the rougher, poorer crowd, while the coffee house was for the educated elite. The old role of the tavern as the central meeting point of society was no longer unquestioned. Even so, the tavern spirit did not vanish. The alehouse, the inn, the public house, each carried something of the medieval tavern's atmosphere. People still gathered, still drank, still shared stories by firelight. The wooden beams and long benches might look much the same, even if the sign above the door now read differently. The transformation was gradual, not sudden. For many villagers in the 15th century, the tavern they entered each evening would not have felt so different from that of their grandparents. But history was shifting beneath their feet. Another factor in this decline was economic. Towns grew wealthier, and the social classes within them grew more distinct. Nobles and wealthy merchants began to host their own feasts in private halls, rather than drinking alongside commoners in taverns. Guilds and societies built their own meeting houses, drawing members away from the public tavern. For the poorer classes, the tavern remained important, but it was no longer the universal gathering place it once had been. Travelers' accounts also hint at this transformation. By the late medieval period, foreign visitors often remarked on the variety of drinking houses in European towns. They noted wine taverns with better furniture and service, alehouses bustling with laborers, and inns offering both. What had once been a single category, the tavern, was now a spectrum of establishments. The decline, then, was not so much an end as a diversification. The tavern did not vanish. It multiplied into many forms. Symbolically, however, the word itself began to carry less weight. By the 17th and 18th centuries, tavern was an old-fashioned word in some regions, replaced by inn or public house. The medieval tavern, with its mix of ale, community, and law, belonged increasingly to memory. Yet its influence lingered, shaping the spaces where people would continue to drink for centuries to come. So as the medieval world gave way to the modern one, the tavern slowly faded from the center of social life. It did not collapse in a single moment, but rather shifted, divided, and re-emerged in new forms. The glow of its hearth was carried into alehouses and inns, its benches reborn in pubs, its spirit of fellowship transplanted into coffee houses. The tavern had lived for centuries, and though it changed, it never truly disappeared. One can imagine perhaps a villager at the close of the 15th century, stepping into his familiar tavern. The air is warm, the ale is foaming, the company is friendly. He does not know that historians will later speak of decline, or that coffee houses will one day rival the place he loves. For him, the tavern is still alive, still essential, still the heart of community. And in many ways he is right. The tavern did not die. It merely transformed. When we look back across the centuries at the medieval tavern, we might be tempted to see it only as a curiosity of the past, a place of smoke and ale, wooden benches and noisy crowds. But if we pause and listen carefully, we may realize that its echoes are still around us today. In fact, the tavern's legacy continues in ways so familiar that we hardly notice them. The most obvious legacy lies in the spaces we still use for gathering and drinking. The pub in Britain, the bistro in France, the inn in Central Europe, the beer hall in Germany, all of these carry threads woven from the medieval tavern. When we step into a cozy pub with its wooden beams, its low firelight, and its simple tables, we are stepping into a descendant of those same places where medieval peasants and merchants once sat. The modern bar counter, with its stools and mugs, is not so different from the long bench where ale was poured into communal cups centuries ago. Even the rituals of drinking survive. To raise a glass in a toast, to share a pitcher among friends, to spend a few hours in easy conversation with drink at hand, these are habits that medieval people would instantly recognize. The exact drinks may have changed, with craft beers, wines, and spirits replacing the simple ales of the past, but the rhythm of the ritual is the same. A cup in hand, company nearby, time slowing into comfort. That is the tavern's gift carried forward. Another legacy lies in community life. For much of medieval Europe, the tavern was the first true public house, a place not tied to church or lord but open to common townsfolk. It gave people a space where voices could mingle freely, where gossip could travel, where songs could be sung without ceremony. In that sense, it planted the roots of the public square, of civic life outside official structures. Even today, pubs and cafes serve as meeting points for neighborhoods. We may not think of it this way, but whenever we see friends gathering at a favorite spot, continuing the life of the community outside their homes, we are watching the old tavern spirit alive and well. The tavern also left its mark on politics. In medieval and early modern towns, many small plots, protests, or guild discussions began in taverns. They were places where people could share grievances or rally behind causes. Later revolutions, from the English Civil War to the American Revolution, found their earliest whispers in public drinking houses. Even today, political movements often find energy in informal gatherings in pubs or coffee houses, away from the glare of official halls. The tavern taught Europe that politics is not only conducted in palaces or parliaments, but also at the common table. There is also the legacy of entertainment. Games of dice, music played by traveling minstrels, riddles and tales told by firelight, all flourished in taverns. In many ways, The tavern was Europe's first stage for ordinary entertainment. The laughter of companions over a game of chance is still heard in modern bars. The small band playing live music in a corner pub is an echo of the medieval fiddler or harpist. Storytelling itself, with its relaxed pace and familiar setting, was at home in taverns. Even this story you are hearing tonight, unhurried and spoken softly, could have been told centuries ago around a tavern's hearth. Economically, taverns laid foundations for entire industries. Brewing and winemaking, once household tasks, expanded into large trades partly because of taverns' steady demand. Roads and travel were shaped by the presence of inns and taverns, drawing routes between one hospitable stop and the next. Even today, entire towns are remembered because of the food and drink served along their roads. That continuity of drink, travel, and commerce began with the humble medieval tavern. Of course, the tavern also left behind its more complicated legacies. The concerns of medieval lawmakers about drunkenness and disorder echo in modern debates about alcohol and its effects on society. The fine balance between fellowship and excess, between relaxation and trouble, has always been fragile. Medieval taverns struggled with it, and so do we. The very fact that rules, licenses, and laws about alcohol exist today is part of the long chain stretching back to those early drinking halls where ale was strong and tempers could flare. But perhaps the deepest legacy is cultural. The tavern shaped how Europeans imagined companionship, leisure, and storytelling. Think of how often in literature the tavern appears, as the lively inn in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where pilgrims gather before their journey, or the bustling alehouse in Shakespeare's plays where comic characters scheme and stumble. The tavern is not just a setting, but a symbol of ordinary life, of laughter, of shared humanity. Even now, films, novels, and games set in medieval worlds almost always feature a tavern, as if no picture of the past would be complete without it. And maybe that is true. The tavern also planted a seed for modern hospitality. The idea that a stranger might walk into a place, be welcomed, offered food and drink, and leave refreshed was not always common in the early Middle Ages. But taverns made it ordinary. That expectation, that when we travel there will be a place to stop, to eat, to drink, to rest, is something we still rely on without thinking. Every roadside diner, every neighborhood cafe, every corner pub carries in it a little of that medieval promise of welcome. So when we speak of the tavern's legacy, we are not only speaking of old wooden beams and barrels of ale, we are speaking of something much more enduring, the sense that human beings need spaces outside their homes and churches, places to gather freely, to share food and drink, to be together without ceremony. That idea, simple yet profound, has never left us. And perhaps that is why the medieval tavern, though long transformed, still lingers in imagination. We can picture it easily. The door creaking open, the rush of warm air, the low chatter, the glow of the hearth. We can almost hear the scrape of stools on the floor, the clink of mugs, the distant tune of a fiddler. The faces may be strange, the language old, the customs foreign, but the feeling of belonging, of company, of comfort, is one we still recognize. So tonight, as we close this long journey through the world of medieval taverns, let us remember that their story is not truly finished. The tavern lives on every time we gather with others to share a drink, a laugh, or a tale. It lives on in the spaces we cherish, where strangers become friends and time seems to soften. The tavern may have begun in the Middle Ages, but its spirit is timeless. And in that quiet thought, perhaps we can find rest.